Hello, Happy New Year. May your 2025 be a year of much reading and joyousness. Today's review, as the thumbnail will suggest, is for Brian W. Aldiss's Earthworks. This is a gorgeous little book, and I've got to talk about the book before I talk about anything else. It's in really good condition. It was in better condition before I started reading it, of course, but I've been really careful with it, so it's still in pretty good condition. It's a signet. That means it's from the New American Library. The spine was completely and utterly unbroken when I got it, and I was being so careful. I was reading it on this angle, sort of angling to try and see the words because I didn't want to break the spine. It's also got that beautiful red page edging that I love so much. The cover is gorgeous, spectacular, dark and foreboding, very relevant to the story. It's a sort of cover that as artwork I would be perfectly happy to hang on my wall. And though the book doesn't attribute it to any artist in particular, I think I'm comfortable in saying that the artist in question was Bruce Pennington. He was an English artist. He did a lot of cover art, and though I can't definitely pinpoint this piece of artwork to him, he was working in the right era at the right time. He did a lot of his early work has that darker, more foreboding look. So yes, Pennington, well worth checking out as an artist in his own right, even if I'm wrong about this. If I'm wrong about this and you know who did this artwork, I want to know. It's very, very impressionist, surrealist. I really like it. I don't think that holding it up to the camera actually does justice to the beauty of the colour work either. Anyhow, good condition. Is it a first edition? A thing that YouTube has taught me to ask about. Well, I kind of think it is. So on the cover it says a signet book, complete and unabridged. On the edge there you've got this strange little P number, P 3116 signet. I think that's because it's old enough not to have had an ISBN attached to it. And in the front of the book you've got a few interesting things. This is given as its first printing July 1967, but it's copyright by Brian W. Aldiss as 1965. And it's based on material which appeared in science fantasy as Skeleton Crew in 1963. So you've got a lot of attributes and you've got a lot of back history here, which is interesting. All of that comes from the inside of the cover. Now, what you don't see here is a front page with a quote. What you've got is the quote kind of smushed up here where you can barely see it. And it's an interesting one. While life reached evilly through empty faces, while space flowed slowly o'er idle bodies, and stars flowed evilly upon vast men, no passion smiled. And it seems to be signed RCA 301 Computer. Now, between 63 and 67, we didn't have computers writing poetry, so that's interesting, and it's very easy to overlook. The only reason I in fact noticed it was because I was looking for the cover artist and I didn't find that, but that was interesting. Oh, another thing about the signet copy that is really amazing is in the middle you've got this ad. For 10 cents you can get Asimov's Foundation series. It's a fold out advertisement, and I just think it is so cute. I would love a time machine to go back and pay my 10 cents to get Asimov's Foundation series from this. It might not be the first thing that I did with my time machine, but it would be up there with a few other ones. So yeah, I adore this book in itself. It's great. I also enjoyed reading it. Sorry. So, plot-wise, what it is about. It starts with our protagonist and he's on board this massive mechanized ship. It's a massive freighter. There's only, I think, 4 people in total on the whole thing. The whole thing is mechanized, automated. in this total dystopian world that is slowly unfolded for us. So we learn it's a starving and overpopulated world. We learn this is one of the last ships. We learn that the crew are on it for 18 months at a time with no shore leave. Because, well, in the old days, if you docked, the docking was humanized, not mechanized, and you had to take things off and put things on, and it took days, and the crew would get maybe a week's shore leave. These days it takes hours, and the crew are off again before anything. They spend their whole time on their ship. And our protagonist has been on this ship, I think, for something like 8 years. He's been there a long time. He started as a lowest possible ranking and worked his way up. Now he's captain. We only really meet a couple of his crew, but we're first introduced to this ship, which I believe might have been called the Trieste Star. I'm not sure about that. And the hook for this whole book is that they're off the African coast, and this dead man walking across the water comes to the ship. Now, I won't say anything more about the dead man and where that leads. It leads them on to Africa by the end of it. But it's a long trip around for us as we hear about our protagonist's early life working as a landsman on farms in England, where he's from. The landsmen were essentially slaves. They were criminals who had been sent out to these farms because no rational man would work on them. The land is completely poisoned. The cities are overpopulated and made on stilts on a platform to get them away from the poison of the land. And the land is overworked and brutalized. We also hear that the cities have to keep inventing more crimes in order to have more criminals to work the land, probably because the attrition is so high. So from there, because it's all backstories that we learn through our protagonist, we build the world slowly. And we find out early on that our protagonist is an entirely unreliable narrator. He suffers these fits, and we learn what caused them. It was poisoning at an early age. And during them, he has hallucinations and he can't be relied on. This sort of beautiful language, by the way, gorgeously written, very literary, combined with this unreliable narrator, these episodes, some of which are definitely hallucinations, others we're not sure to begin with, and a world that is almost a hallucination to us, the reader, in itself. This combination makes for a very, I think I'm correct in saying this is New Wave English style, and it is a gorgeous style of writing. Anyone who has enjoyed Aldiss in the past, especially Hot House, I think will enjoy this book. But it's not really linear, obvious narrative. However, it is gorgeous. I won't say too much more about the plot now. The plot is essentially only really key in building this dystopia for us, which is what Aldiss is doing. Aldiss is an author I've got strange relations with. It's like, I remember him as an author I like and respect. I don't always love the reading experience of his books, but I do respect the hell out of everything he does. I certainly respect the hell out of his writing. He doesn't do everything well, but two things he does really well is world building. I think his world building is absolutely spectacular, beyond a doubt. And his writing is so gorgeous. It is literary, it's erudite, it's evocative, and I'm going to read a couple of bits because this short book, it's a little thing and it's 128 pages, but it took me days because the writing itself is so beautiful that you end up reading it the same way you would a Dickens for the language itself as much as anything else. So here we are on page 7. There's a bit here that I really liked. Because it's the narrator telling the story of his early time, he's talking to you directly. And here he says, "Already this account is getting out of hand. Let's start again. The imprisonment words bring. They get all through you. You live in them and out of them, and they make rings around the universe. I suppose they were invented to be a help. All I can say, I was freer when I was imprisoned on the land. The nip of winter, the heaviness of bed on those dark nights, with everything you owned on or around you, the stink of the tractor smoke, almost unseen in the Blue Dawn compound. It's not the words that don't click with things, it's more that when you write them down, they become a different sort of reality of their own. But who am I to say? Now, who he is to say is obviously our narrator, and his name is interesting. It's Noel Noland. Noel spelled Knowle and Noland spelled Noland. Now, I'm entirely certain that Aldiss was making a point with this protagonist's name. The Noland, I think, is obvious. The Noel is a couple of different things it could be. I reckon if someone was writing a literary work about a novel, I think you could do a lot with Earthworks. I don't know if anyone ever has. It's such a small thing, and I haven't ever heard anyone else really discussing it. If there are people out there on YouTube who are discussing this, I want to know about them, and if you've seen them, do please send me a link or a description. Yes, so Noel's Noland, our unreliable narrator, who wrestles with ghosts and his past, and he's got this dark stranger pursuing him, which his doctor on board the ship says is his guilt over having betrayed people in the past. And he talks about the different levels here. So he's got the landsman, he's got the farmer who runs all the farms, you've got the people in the city, and the man who taught them to read and presumably write. Noland is one of the very few people in this world who can read, and it's a skill that he occasionally hugs preciously to him, and occasionally, I guess, throws away to anyone who will listen. But Aldiss has done something interesting with him as a reader, because often if you're looking at a dystopian universe or world in which most people can't read, your reader is given to you as someone who has a superior knowledge, a better understanding, more in-depth insight. And Noel's Noland really isn't given to us that way by Aldiss. And I think that's an interesting choice, which I enjoyed. So Noland reads whatever he can get, but there's not a lot. He finds books in a disused village that he's not meant to be in. He falls in with a group of nomads at one stage as well. We hear about that, which led to a lot of his guilt. I forget what they're called. Wanderers? Walkers. Basically, they're people who've slipped out of the prison system and the city system and are walking the lands. But despite being a reader, Noland remains fairly ignorant and uninterested in politics or the world around him right to the end. This isn't his thing. He reads these books and he enjoys getting these snippets from them of a completely and utterly gone past, which is our past, of course. But he doesn't really use them in an intellectual sense to think about his world or the righteousness of it. So before I get into that more, I'm going to read another little bit. It's from page 35, and I think this is just pure beauty as well. The whole sky was a bed of little fleecy cirrus clouds. Hardly clouds, for the sun shone bright and chill through them. A yellow mist, like a coating on a sick tongue, lay over the land, a reminder of the spraying for dilly beetle we had given the place 2 days before. How is that? A yellow mist, like a coating on a sick tongue. That just rings of T.S. Eliot and his yellow smoke that wraps once around a chimney stack and falls asleep. Beautiful writing all the way through. The literary value is higher in the beginning, where we don't really have much plot. We've got the world building. At the end, we start to get a little bit more adventure, a little bit more plot happening. And the writing, while still gorgeous all the way through, takes a little bit of a second place to things. Okay, so world building, dystopian, obviously. Aldiss has done some fascinating things here. And writing in the 60s, it almost seems prescient to you reading it today, but it really isn't, because the 60s was when Rachel Carson was writing her Silent Spring, when in large tracts of the world you could see the earth being depauperated by mechanized farming techniques, farms getting bigger and bigger, swallowing villages, relying more on pesticides and herbicides and mutated plants that are sickly and not producing well because the earth is so exhausted. This is obviously very much something that Aldiss is giving us in this book. He focuses on it heavily, and Noel Noland's time on the land as a landsman really brings that home. So on page 37 there's a part where Aldiss really goes into how the landsman system got more and more toxic and more poison, how all the trees were felled, how essentially you've got a completely dead world almost everywhere. You've got it in Europe, you've got it in England, we hear it's the same in America. We assume in Asia kind of isn't talked about very much, and Australia doesn't exist on Aldiss's particular world, but I've not heard about that. Africa, however, is the big new challenge. That's a place where some of the soil is actually still okay, but it's also the area where they're mining sand to send back to Europe and the United Kingdom or England to be infused with synthetic bacteria so it might one day grow things. So Africa is the roiling area of the future. And it's to Africa that Noel Noland ends up going when his ship is wrecked on the shore, and he becomes enmeshed in plot on Africa that I'm not going to tell you about. I'm not going to tell you anything about it. I'm sure it's somewhere online if you want to spoil it for yourself, but I don't think you should. I think you should just read the book. If you like Aldiss, I suspect you'll love this one. And I think there's someone out there maybe watching now who did actually recommend Earthworks based on the fact that I loved Hot House. So whoever you are, if you're there, thank you. World building, dystopian. He's got so much packed into those small number of pages. It's amazing. And one of the things I really liked was on page 21 when he talks about the birth control crisis. And that was an interesting one because the day I read about the birth control crisis was the same day I saw in the news that a class action was being developed by Shine lawyers against Depo-Provera, which is a long-term which is a birth control given as an injection and which has now been seen to cause tumours in the brain, which is lovely. Where is that bit about the birth control crisis? I wonder if I can find it easily. No, I probably can't. It's basically part of our structuring. The earth is sick, there's way too many humans, and everything is making them sick. Nearly every human is starving, and we hear from Noel Noland that everyone you see, even in Africa, has got that thin, starved look of someone who's never had enough to eat. And he talks about all the diseases that are arising through that. Even when you do get something to eat from these heavily mechanized mechanisms, you've got plant materials that are toxic, you've got animal proteins that have been developed with certain things that sound a bit like growth hormones that mean that they are actually toxic. But he says we eat them anyway, we have no choice. So I also got the impression from this that Brian Aldiss truly hated centralisation. He talks about all the empty deserted villages throughout England being bulldozed and all the people forced into the cities where they could be better controlled. So, weaknesses Aldiss has in his writing, in my opinion, are that he doesn't do characters well. He often doesn't do characters at all. He just has a thing that he tells you as a character in order to tell the story. I don't think this one is too bad for that. I think Noel Noland comes across as an individual to sufficient extent. If you're going to call someone Noel Noland, I think, and make them an unreliable narrator who is hallucinating at you a good portion of the time, I think you can't really expect us to feel for them or with them. They aren't a real person in that regard. No one else, of course, has a character. No one meets various people along the way, one of which is the farmer. Apparently they grew up in the orphanages where he's from, hearing about the farmer as this character which they imagined as a big, almost demonic character. Later, Knowles is picked up, he becomes a criminal, he gets sent out to be a landman, work these farms, which he doesn't completely hate. And then he gets accused of doing something even worse, and he gets to meet the farmer, the monstrous character. The farmer appears later on in the book for different reasons. And an interesting thing that Knowles says about them, on page 38, he was telling us how he cursed the farmer at a point in his life, and then he says that he had not previously known enough to curse the system that had produced the farmer. So yes, Aldiss doesn't do characters terribly well, and I think that his plots can be random and occasionally non-existent. Sorry, Aldiss fans. He creates an amazing world, an incredible scenario. You love reading about that world. This is, I'm going to say, one of the best dystopias I've read. But you don't really have much of a plot happening in it. So the next couple of things I say might be a bit spoilery. Go away and read it and then come back. So Knowles ends up crashing his ship onto the coast of Africa after the dead man gets onto his ship. Off the dead man, he's got this packages of letters from a woman called Justine to a man called Peter. And based on that package, he gets enmeshed in these political things that are happening. He gets accused of being a spy. He's one of the few people that make it off the ship. And the ship is nuclear powered, so it ends up exploding. He ends up in this bizarre town that looks as if it's half demolished, but is actually in the course of being constructed. And Aldiss really does an amazing job of building this African town for us. In it, a number of things happen. He falls in with these people who have a goal to change the world through world war, basically. Does it happen? We don't really know. It ends before that. At no point are we given the stage at which Knowles Noland is sitting there writing this down. It doesn't sound like he ever had time in the course of this book to do that. Maybe it happened after the book. We don't know. We're not given any of that. There's also things in this book that make me think it might be a fix-up. There's points where in his writing, he talks about things that he said that haven't been said and never are. So I'm not sure if that's Aldiss doing a fix-up novel because this was based on a magazine story, or if it's Aldiss trying to make sure that we realize that Noland is a confused and unreliable narrator. It could be either way, and honestly, it didn't bother me enough for me to think about it in any extent. The ship. One thing I loved about the ship was the descriptions of these huge hangar-like mechanized docking facilities and the ships that go around the world forever. We also learn about how these ships are falling into the past and they're being replaced by a new type of technology. So the technology and the world building are excellent. The language is superbly beautiful. If you like Aldiss in general, I'd say this would probably be a highlight for you. And for me, who didn't bond with the Heliconias as much as I really wanted to, I thought this was the perfect length of novel for Aldiss. He gets to do his world building, which he does so well. He gets to tell us all about this world that he's imagined, and we see enough of it, but not too much. We don't get distracted by the plots that Aldiss, I've got to tell you, he's no good at them. I don't think he's even interested in them. I just think he puts in a plot because that's something that he knows he's meant to do. The plot that we've got here is basically Noland learning a little bit more about his world, but not very much, and doing some things for no particular reason, often while he's hallucinating. But within that context, great book. If you like dystopias, it's definitely for you. If you like beautiful literary sci-fi writing, this is definitely for you. If you require strong characters, this might not be for you. And if you require a strong plot that makes sense, again, it might not be for you. But if you think you want to expand into more new wavy type stuff, especially English New Wavy, I would recommend it. And if you like American New Wavy type stuff, I think you should try the English style as well, because I like it better. Anyway, thank you for watching. Happy New Year. Read good things in 2025. I'm going to be telling you all about the things that I read in 2025. So please like, comment, subscribe, all that algorithm stuff. Thank you very much for watching this review.